In an era defined by giants and failing tyrants, a destiny was forged in the silence of the fields. Israel had its hero, a king named Saul. But power is a fragile thing. He disobeyed, he faltered, and the spirit that once led him vanished. The prophet Samuel was sent on a suicide mission. Find the replacement. Not in a palace, but in a house called Jesse's. He was the underdog. His own father forgot, but in the eyes of the Almighty, he was the only one who mattered. A secret king was born. But before he can wear the crown, he has to survive the valley. You've heard the name David, but you haven't seen the shadow he's about to face. Think 9 feet of solid muscle, bronze armor that can't be pierced,
The Lord anoints
and a challenge that has sent an entire army into a state of paralysis. The real heart-pounding action is just seconds away. Don't blink. The greatest upset in human history is coming up next. Israel had its first king, but the throne was beginning to crack. King Saul had been chosen by God, but time and again, he chose his own path over divine command. Now, the Spirit has departed, leaving a king consumed by a dark, tormenting silence. In the shadows, a new destiny was being forged. The prophet Samuel was sent on a secret mission to Bethlehem, to the house of a man named Jesse. Among his sons, a ruler was waiting, but he wouldn't be found where anyone expected. On Abiwan, the elite sons of Jesse stepped forward. Eliab, tall and striking, surely the next king. But the Lord stopped the prophet in his tracks. Do not look at his appearance, the voice whispered. Man looks at the outward face, but I look at the heart. 7 sons passed by, 7 times. The answer was no. Then came the youngest, so overlooked that his own father hadn't even bothered to bring him to the meeting. A boy named David, straight from the smelling fields and the company of sheep. He looked nothing like a king, but as the oil touched his head, the atmosphere changed forever. He was anointed in the dark, a secret king carrying a promise only God could see. He returned to his flock, fighting lions and bears in the silence of the wilderness, unaware that his greatest battle in a valley of decision was drawing near. You've seen the boy who was forgotten by his father, but you haven't seen the giant who wants to crush his nation. What happens when a shepherd's staff meets a 9-foot spear of solid bronze? The most legendary upset in history is about to unfold. Don't go anywhere. The shadow of Goliath is falling over the valley in part 2. And you won't believe what David does next. The valley of Elah was no longer a place of peace. 2 armies stood perched on opposite hills, divided by a chasm of terror. For 40 days, the sun rose and set to the same soul-crushing sound, the roar of a monster. From the Philistine camp emerged Goliath, the champion, standing over 9 feet tall, encased in bronze that glittered like a dark sun. His spear was the size of a weaver's beam, and his voice was a weapon of its own. Choose a man, he bellowed, mocking the God of Israel. But even the tallest soldiers in Saul's army stood frozen. paralyzed by a shadow they couldn't overcome. Enter David. He wasn't there for glory. He was there on an errand for his father, carrying bread and cheese for his brothers. He arrived just as the giant stepped out for his daily ritual of mockery. While the veteran warriors of Israel turned and fled in fear, the shepherd boy stood his ground. He didn't see a giant. He saw a man defying the living God. David's brothers mocked his arrogance, and King Saul doubted his youth. But David remembered the lion and the bear. He refused the king's heavy armor, for his strength didn't come from steel. With only a staff, 5 smooth stones from the brook, and a simple sling, the boy stepped into the center of the valley. The giant laughed, cursed, and threatened to feed David to the birds. But David didn't flinch. "You come to me with a sword and spear," he shouted back, his voice steady and piercing. "But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts. The stones are in the bag. The sling is ready. The giant is charging, and the ground is literally cracking beneath his feet. Is this the end of a brave boy's life? Or the beginning of a king's legend? The most explosive moment in ancient history is happening right now. Don't move a muscle. The stone is about to fly, and you won't believe the silence that follows. The giant had fallen, and the valley of Elah was silent no more. A shepherd boy had done the impossible, standing over the fallen champion with nothing but faith and a stone. But as David held the trophy of his victory, a new kind of battle was beginning, one that wouldn't be fought with slings, but with hearts. In the wake of the triumph, a soul-deep bond was forged. Jonathan, the crown prince of Israel, looked at David and saw not a rival, but a brother. In an act of radical surrender, the heir to the throne stripped off his royal robe and handed David his sword, his bow, and his future. It was a covenant of love that transcended bloodlines, a friendship that would become the stuff of legend. But while a prince loved, a king loathed. As the women of Israel sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s," the seeds of madness took root in Saul's heart. Jealousy is a monster more dangerous than any giant. The man who once welcomed David now watched him through narrowed, hateful eyes. The palace became a prison. One moment, David was playing his harp to soothe the king's tormented soul. The next, he was dodging spears launched by the very hand he served. Twice the steel flew, and twice David escaped. The hero of Israel was now a fugitive in his own land, forced to flee through windows and hide in the dark of night. 2 friends met one last time in a field of arrows to say a goodbye that would last a lifetime. They wept for a kingdom divided and a peace they would never share again. David disappeared into the wilderness, trading his harp for a cave, and his fame for a life on the run. David is now a hunted man, hiding in the dark corners of the earth, while the king he loves tries to end his life. But the greatest test of his character isn't how he handles the giant, it's how he handles the king when he finally has him at the edge of his blade. The most powerful moment of restraint in history is coming up next. Don't turn away. The cave of En-Gedi holds a secret that will define what it truly means to be a king. The hero of Israel had become a ghost in the wilderness. For years, David lived in the mouth of caves and the shadows of forests, leading a band of outcasts, while King Saul hunted him with 3,000 elite soldiers. But the desert was not just a hiding place. It was a throne room, where a shepherd was learning that true power is not seized, it is given by God. The moment of ultimate temptation arrived in the dark of En-Gedi. Saul entered the very cave where David lay hidden, vulnerable and unaware. David's men whispered of destiny and revenge, urging him to strike his enemy. But as David crept forward, he did not take a life. He only cut a corner from the king's robe. "The Lord forbid that I should raise my hand against his anointed," he declared. In that cave, David proved he was already a king at heart. For he conquered his own anger before he ever conquered a nation. But time spares no one. On the heights of Mount Gilboa, the sun set on the house of Saul. The Philistines pressed hard, and the crown fell in the heat of battle. Jonathan, the faithful friend, and Saul, the tormented king, fell together on the field of honor. David did not celebrate the death of his pursuer. Instead, he tore his clothes and wept, singing a lament for the fallen mighty that would echo through generations. After more than a decade of waiting, running, and trusting, the promise made in a small house in Bethlehem finally came to pass. The tribes of Israel gathered to crown the man who had shepherded them long before he wore the gold. David stepped onto the throne, not as a conqueror who took what he wanted, but as a servant who waited for God's timing. From the fields of Bethlehem to the walls of Jerusalem, David's story reminds us that God sees what the world overlooks. Your giant may be tall, and your wilderness may be long, but the story is not over. Trust the timing. Trust the process. For every lion fought in secret is preparing you for a kingdom you cannot yet see. The shepherd has finally become the king, and the promise of Bethlehem is fulfilled, but every great story leaves behind a legacy that can change your life today. Thank you for joining us on this cinematic journey from the forgotten sheepfolds to the glorious throne of Israel. David's story proves that while the world looks at the surface, God sees the heart. No matter how many lions or giants you face, remember that your time in the wilderness is only preparing you for a kingdom you cannot yet see. To stay inspired and never miss our next epic story of faith, please subscribe to Saintly Journey. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful lessons to life. Share this with someone who needs